Hello and welcome to, I guess, what I'll affectionately call the very terrible podcast with myself, Alex Kozora from SteelersDepot.com. And as I said last time, as I put up in the article yesterday, since Dave is moving and there won't be a terrible podcast for at least this whole week, I wanted to at least try to supplement it with the very watered down version of a podcast, videocast, vlog, whatever you want to call it. Try to take your feedback from last time. Again, thank you very much for the very honest and open criticism. I really sincerely do appreciate it. Always trying to figure out how to get better. I'm trying to wear a Pittsburgh shirt. It's a little hard to see. It's actually from a website called 26shirts.com. It's a very cool website. Some of the proceeds go to families with kids battling cancer and things like that. I'll put a link in the description on YouTube to this. There's a new shirt every week, and I think they sell for 2 weeks, and then once that's over, they move on to another one. So it's kind of a cool thing. So you can't get this shirt specifically, but they always have a cool Pittsburgh related design. Again, I'll put a link in the description for that. Tried to clean up the room a little bit, as you can kind of see behind me. Can't get it perfect. It's my room. I have stuff in there, unfortunately. Um, and I didn't really ever intend or think people would just watch me for however long the video is. Usually, whenever I listen to something that doesn't have a lot of, visual, visceral appeal, I click off when I'm reading an article or working with Steelers Depot doing an article or something else. Where I kind of listen to this in the background. But I try to make things as neat as I can. It's not perfect. Sorry, I straightened the picture though because it was crooked. That was that was definitely, if you have OCD, that can definitely be bothersome. The brightness, sorry, if it's a little too bright behind me. It's like partly cloudy today. I'm not sure why it's that bright. It's just the webcam, and I don't have the great curtains to try to shield the light. Yes, this is not in mom's basement. Technically, this is in actually my room, but close enough. So anyway, we're gonna do the mailbag, like I said. Thank you guys for sending in questions so swiftly, and again, great questions. We'll still do our Thursday actual kind of live chat. While I'm typing up the answers instead of talking to you. But I wanted to again try to supplement, something for the Terrible Podcast while it's out for at least this week while Dave gets moved in and gets settled and all that. So I have the questions pulled up here, and I'm just going to read them down in order as they appear on my screen. So we'll start with Donald Tillman. And he says, I remember you saying you liked Sean Davis at the Shrine Game practices or the Senior Bowl. Do you think this kid will be the best coverage safety and Mitchell will eventually play in the box? Well, Donald, I think that, and this is kind of a cliche answer to start. I'll get to an actual answer in a second here. But the Steelers safeties are interchangeable. You don't really have a clear designated cover guy and a clear as a designated box guy with all the blitzing and fire zones and different responsibilities that the safeties have. You're going to have guys that are going to play single high, two high. Guys are going to roll into the box, so they're going to switch off depending on the scheme, depending on the game plan for that week. Making your schemes and your coverages, have that variety because you got to have variety of a defense, regardless of what you run. Whether you're 4 down front, 3 down front, no matter how much you blitz, no matter what you do, Pittsburgh or league wide, I think you got to have variety in how you carry that out. You can't be predictable. If you're predictable, offenses in this day and age are just going to absolutely tear you apart. So I think you're going to see a little bit of both. I think mainly though, Sean Davis is going to start in the box whenever he does end up getting significant snaps. Because honestly, Mitchell, I know he's a hard hitter, and people think, well, he should play strong safety. He's the guy that does his best and has really played in his career in center field. It's what he's done the last 2 years in Pittsburgh. And yeah, part of that was because Troy in his last year and then Will Allen last year, they were very far from optimal coverage guys, and it forced Mitchell's hand to play in center field a lot more. But even in Carolina, if you look back, what would that be, 2013, his 1 year in Carolina, he was playing single high almost exclusively and playing way deep. I mean, there were times where he's lining 20, 25 yards off the ball and playing that single high. So, that's kind of where he's done his work. So I don't really see that drastically changing where he's going to all of a sudden become an in-the-box guy. I think he's a better cover guy than people give you credit for. Obviously a hard hitter that can, disrupt and separate player from ball and some of those, deep balls, which is what you got to have. You got to have somebody who can go up there and match up with AJ Green vertically. And now Corey Coleman with what Cleveland got. And same in Baltimore with some of the weapons that they have. So, I think you're going to see Mitchell as mainly that single high guy, but they're going to move around. quite a bit. But I think Davis, and again, as a rookie, it's a lot of trust, but you're a rookie single eye. Even Troy made a lot of mistakes his rookie year. I think that might be asking too much. I think playing in the box and playing in more confined space is best for Sean Davis, at least early on. All right. So James Cowan says, by what week, if any, do you see Burns, Davis, and Hargrave all starting this year? And then there's a second question, which I'll touch on briefly here in a second. It's hard to pin down a week. I think for Burns, at best, it would be after the bye, just because you're talking about a junior, 23 starts, has never really gotten to dedicate his life to football. He's had the track stuff to not deal with, but that he's been involved in that's taken away some of his time. So again, I think it's tough to see Burns jumping a Ross Cockrell, who played well, who has a year in the system and has been thrown into the fire and done. I think reasonably well, as reasonably well as you can hope for concerning his situation. So I think it's tough for Burns. I think Davis is in a similar spot. I think you'll see a dime package created for Sean Davis, what the Steelers started doing week 14 and on last year. Having Robert Golden play that dime defender. I'm going to do a film room post, I think, for tomorrow, Tuesday, kind of on some of the things you could see Sean Davis doing in dime. So he won't be the starter, but I think there's a chance to get some immediate snaps there. But again, Golden, a veteran, I think has played well in the month that he came in for Will Allen last year after Allen's ankle injury against the Chargers. I think it's tough to pass up Golden, even though Davis is the superior athlete and has the higher ceiling. Hargrave, I think that's the one guy they could start before the bye. And there could be a rotation like Dupree last year, or maybe Hargrave isn't technically the starter. McCullers might get the first couple snaps in the base 3-4 defense. But you're going to see Hargrave get a lot of playing time. He's going to get maybe potentially kind of what starter snaps would be for a nose tackle / rotational guy in sub package football for Cam Hayward and Stephon Tuitt. So I think of those three, I think Hargrave has the easiest path to seeing some more significant playing time right out of the gate. I think Davis is situational, and I think Burns is going to really have to do something special and something that might surprise me and maybe a lot of Steelers fans to really get consistent snaps over Ross Cockrell. He might get some time, and we know the Steelers' cornerback rotation, at least as last year tells us, was pretty funky and really, honestly, impossible to predict. I could not get a feel for when they would bring in Blake and Cockrell the last 4 weeks of the season. It was just whenever they do it, it's when they do it. So it's really hard to say for sure. But I think Burns Davis after the bye at best. I think Davis could by at season's end. I think Burns won't. But we got a long way to go. We'll see. We'll see how things go. The other question James had is, who is the Rosie Nix this year? Someone that comes out of nowhere to be loved by coaches in Steelers Nation. Man, that is a tough question. Obviously, no one, even myself, anyone else who follows this team as closely as we do, really ever thought that Roosevelt Nix would become what he is now. So it's really really hard to think about that question. Obviously, it can't be someone we've seen play before. Can't be a draft pick that has a level of expectations. Um, a couple names that I kind of kicked around, and again, these are all long shots. But if you're asking for a Rosie Nix type who was clearly a long shot, these are the answers I have to give you. I can't tell you, Sammy Coates. That's not the same as Roosevelt Nix. You can't compare a third round pick to a guy that I had thought had no chance to make this roster. But maybe a Jacob Hagan, the safety, who was on the Rams roster last year, went through the whole preseason, did well. He's got big hands. He was a ball hawk in college. Maybe he can make some noise as a guy that can make some splash plays. That's how Rosie Nix made this team. He made some splash plays. You think about the punt block against Carolina. Excuse me, the punt block against Carolina. Last year. That was a big splash play that helped vault him onto the roster. So I could see Hagan, maybe if something crazy happens, maybe a safety spot opens up, maybe he takes Ventrone's spot, or maybe even Shamarko Thomas. Again, that's quite the long shot, but who thought Rosie Nix was going to get kept alongside Will Johnson last year? So, you think about him. One of the undrafted kids, Newberry, the defensive end from Florida State, who I still have trouble with his first name. I looked it up a little while ago, and now I can't in the moment think of how to pronounce it. I don't want to say it wrong. I think it's Giorgio. The defensive end from Florida State, Newberry, who's got length, 34-inch arms, who ran well at the combine. He ran a 4.94, showed some explosion. This is a guy that got moved to tight end at Florida State in 2013, and then he got moved back to defensive end, I think 2014, 2015. So he's got it. He's an athlete. He's got length. He's got a little bit of productivity. He was a prized athlete coming out of high school. I think he was a 4 or 5 star recruit. So he's got a bit of a track record to him and a resume. And if the Steelers team keeps 6 defensive linemen, that sixth spot is pretty open. I think Ricardo Matthews does get kept just to have that excuse me, just to have that veteran guy behind, you know, um, Hayward and Tuitt, and then Hargrave as a situational, rotational guy in sub package. If you're talking base defense, I think Matthews going to make it because you don't want to have a bunch of guys that have barely or ever played football out there. So I think Matthews does make it. But then if they keep 6, if it's Lyons and Walton, then you throw Newberry in, maybe he makes some noise. Maybe he is able to get that 6th spot, and that won't be the same as Rosie Nix because Newberry's not going to be able to make those special teams plays that Nix did. But I think it's a guy that could have a good training camp. And if you're thinking about undrafted free agent, they could get his way onto the roster, not counting specialists. I think maybe Monday the punter would have the best shot, considering he just has to beat out Jordan Berry. But I think if you're looking for other undrafted guys that might have a potential to push for a roster spot, I think Newberry could be that guy. So thank you for your question, James. Xavier Golden says he's curious what the chances of the Steelers getting a new deal done with Le'Veon Bell this offseason are. Xavier, that's really tough for me to say. It's a cap question. It's a negotiation question. There's so many things that I don't know what the team's cap space is, how they, what their plan is, what Bell's asking for, what the market rate is, what the Steelers are willing to give. There's a lot of variables in play that are really, really tough for me to try to, guess at. I think the one could get done. I think one will get done eventually. He's not going to hit the market, whether it's this year or next year or whenever a deal gets done. But he's not going to be a free agent. He's not going to go anywhere. I think Pittsburgh recognizes the talent, and Pittsburgh does a great job of locking up the talent that they have long term. Rarely does an all-star guy get away. Maybe Emmanuel Sanders, but he was not the all-star talent that Le'Veon Bell was. Far from it. So I think it will happen at some point, maybe this offseason. I think maybe you can get a little better value maybe this year coming off the injury. Maybe that's a better chip that you can put at the table for. But I think it does get done. Does it get done, before training camp? My guess is, my gut instinct, if I had to say something, I think it does get done to lock up that talent, not have to worry about it. You can extend David DeCastro, get his cap hit down this year, and then maybe you're going to pay Bell a little bit more money, especially in that signing bonus. But maybe you can make up for it by doing things like extending David DeCastro. So that's my guess, is that the Le'Veon Bell deal does get done. But even if it doesn't, I wouldn't worry about it one bit. The notorious Tom, well-known commenter on here, says another year, another Pantherless draft. What gives? Will I ever get to keep one of my babies? I don't know what to tell you, man. I'm sorry that there's no Pitt Panthers. Ray Vinipal is in camp as a safety, as a futures guy. So you got one Pitt Panther to root for someone to make it. Maybe they just know too much about these guys. Maybe sometimes, it's like the sausage is made principle. You don't want to see how the sausage is made. Maybe you see these guys every day, hear about them, and so you hear more of the bad stuff than you would if you were looking at these guys a little bit farther away and just watching tape and talking to coaches and things like that. So I don't know what to tell you, but I just root for Ray Vinipal to make some noise in camp. Lambert 58 says, do you see the Steelers adding another nose tackle in addition to McCullers and Hargrave, or do you believe that the brain trust thinks the position is set going into the 2016 season? Thanks. Yeah, I don't see them making another move at nose tackle. There's not a real compelling reason to. You are still talking about a position that has a very limited amount of snaps. You're too deep there. You have your draft pick. You have now what I would deem a veteran in Daniel McCullers. I don't see there's any compelling reason. Again, it's so hard to find a nose tackle that can give you those sub-package snaps, and that's what Hargrave can do. And at this stage in the game, sitting here in May, there's no one on the market that's going to be able to do that. So unless there's an injury that happens, the Steelers are going to stick with what they have at nose tackle. Adam G says, if you had to pick 2 out of our first 3 draft picks starting by midseason, who would you go with? Yeah, I kind of already answered that question, I guess, before. I think the first question that we had from Donald, I believe it was, no, it wasn't Donald. It was somebody else, I think James Cowser. But anyway, I could see Hargrave getting those starting snaps, and I don't know if anyone else is going to be able to get that starting gig early on. I think Sean Davis can have a role in the dime package on third down, maybe some other situational football. When you face teams with athletic tight ends, maybe you go more dime, thinking New England. maybe a little bit against Cleveland, the matchup against Gary Barnidge, Cincinnati with Tyler Kroft and Tyler Eifert. But again, it's tough in terms of actual bona fide starting. It's tough to see a path because Burns is a junior. Because Davis, you're going against a veteran in Robert Golden. I think Hargrave has your best chance to do it. Let's see here. Trap says, "Hey Alex, I wanted to know if you think Ross Cockrell can be a long-term starter for the Steelers." Um, I guess it depends on what you define as long-term. I think he can be here for several years. He's not going to be here, I don't think, 8 years from now. But I thought Cockrell did some positive things last year, right? And I've said this before a million times. I know it's probably sound like a broken record at this point, but Cockrell's a guy that came in basically at the last second. Didn't only get claimed, but he was part of the first 75, that 275 cuts. Then a week later, I think Pittsburgh ended up picking him up. And then, a couple weeks in, he's playing a lot. And by season's end, he played, I think, 60 or 65% of the time. So to do that and look reasonably well, I think is impressive. The Steelers obviously like him. They had interest in him coming out of Duke, and obviously they ended up signing him and playing him so much. So I think there's something there. I don't think he's an elite talent. I don't think he's going to be anything more than an adequate number two. He's not a physical guy playing the run, so he deviated a little bit from what you kind of think the Steelers want in a corner. He's got shorter arms, not even 30 inches. So with that frame, it's a little surprising. But I think that he's a guy that has played well in the snaps that he's gotten in the situation he's been in, and so I think that's a guy that can definitely hang around in the Steelers system for a little while. Spencer Crick says, do you see Feeney as an inside guy or an outside guy? Could he give you snaps at both potentially? Well, I mean, the team sees him as an outside guy right now, so that's really kind of all that matters, regardless of what I think. But I said it before, I kind of thought when they drafted him, he would be kind of called as an inside guy. Some other people have made the comparisons to kind of a Stevenson Sylvester, kind of what is he, outside or inside? I think Feeney's a better athlete, though, but you kind of, have the same feel, but you don't have a super defined position. I think eventually Feeney's going to have to play off ball, be probably more of an inside guy. He's just not someone that's going to be strong enough to set the edge. Isn't I think an accomplished enough pass rusher. Who doesn't have that bend around the edge. He gets a little stiff tipped. That is his pass rush plans aren't totally there, which if he's a rookie, you're going to get better at, of course. But I don't really get that feeling that he's going to be, wow, this guy can be, a starting outside linebacker, consistently get pressure at the quarterback. Again, similar to Jarvis Jones, which I talked about last time, where the strength really isn't there. I think to be a good pass rusher, a lot of it starts with strength and bend and flexibility. I think Feeney kind of lacks in some of those areas. So I think you're going to eventually see him kind of move more inside. But as I said last time, we're talking about special team snaps right now, cutting your teeth there, making an impact on running down punts and kicks and all that good stuff. Steel Paul says, based on everything we've seen, what do you speculate the Steelers' plans is for the right outside linebacker spot in 2017? Paul, I don't think it's a whole lot different than what happened in 2016. I think you're still going to see Harrison get the majority of the snaps over Jarvis Jones, somewhere in that 55-45, split, which I think is what it was last year. I'm remembering the charting that I did last year. I looked it up a little bit before I started recording this. You're going to see those guys drop into coverage more than the left side. Jarvis Jones dropped into coverage 28% of the time last year. James Harrison was around 21.5%. Just schematically, that's the side they want to drop a little bit more. Bud Dupree dropped just 12%. Arthur Moats just 16%. So it's not even words rookie versus veteran because both didn't drop nearly as much either. It's not like Harrison is great in dropping into coverage. He's best going forward, but that's just kind of naturally the way it goes. So in terms of the snaps and the way that they're used, I don't see it's a big difference from last year. Jolly Rob 68 says, can you explain how you would add / use the 2016 draft picks in the sub package in a 2-4-5 or a 3-3-5 defense? And I know a lot of people have talked about and written about potential for a 3-3-5. I'm not going to deny that there's no chance you can't see some wrinkles in there, especially now that you've added Javon Hargrave and you can play that 3-down pass rushing front with Hayward and Tuitt and Hargrave. But the evidence overall is still really lacking. There's not really many compelling reasons, although some teams do run a little bit of that 3-3-5 in the NFL, which no one really talks about. I saw Cleveland do it. I think Baltimore's done some of it. I think Denver's done a little bit of it. It's certainly far from anyone's bread and butter like it is in college with West Virginia, and I'm sure several other teams that I'm not thinking of right now. For a lot of reasons, I'm going to try to look into it a little bit more because I don't have the greatest explanation for why the 3-3-5 isn't as prominent. I think it's harder to stop the run out of that front. But I just don't see it being used a lot, and there's not really any evidence that it will. But for the 2-4-5, like I said, Hargrave is going to definitely be a sub-package guy who's going to spell Hayward into it to get some snaps there as the one tech, as the three tech, probably better as the three than the one in some sub-package situations. But you might end up seeing, both, just, the way that you're playing your front, depending on how the offense, what their strength is. But so you're going to see Hargrave used in there. For Sean Davis, I don't think it's about the 2-4-5, but I think, though, running that dime package, so it would be that 2-3-6 with Davis being that sixth defensive back. Could definitely see, and I expect Davis to get some snaps there. Maybe it's just on third and long as it was mainly last year, or maybe it evolves to more, prominence where you're playing some on first down. I'm really interested in seeing if there's an evolution for that in Pittsburgh. I don't know for sure. None of us know, of course. But that's one of the biggest things I'm going to be looking for is, do we see some more of that dime package outside of obvious passing situations, third and long, late game, half situations? And if so, then Sean Davis is an absolutely perfect fit there as a guy that can wear a lot of hats, can play down in the box a little bit more, still give you that physicality and run defense, while being a guy that can match up against the tight end or, the number 3 in the slot, or be a blitzer, and just kind of be a fun chess piece to move around with. So that's why I'm really excited about Sean Davis's impact year one. I think there's definite impact to be had in year one, in that 2-3-6, though, more than the 2-4-5, which is your nickel front. 2-3-6 will be your dime. James P. Kelly, he has a bunch of questions. I'm just going to pick one out of, I think, the 4 that he has. He says, do you see the Steelers doing anything exotic on defense to utilize unique talents of specific players? For example, running hybrid press zone coverages to pit someone like Artie Burns in press against A.J. Green while the rest of the defense plays zone. Yeah, I think that's smart for any coaching staff to do. I think the worst thing a coaching staff can do is be so rigid and stubborn and not kind of adapt to the players that it has. I think it'd be absolutely foolish for Pittsburgh to draft Artie Burns, knowing he's not a perfect fit for the scheme, and then force him to be an imperfect fit in the scheme. I mean, you're going to have to do a little bit of it. You're going to have to adjust your own game, but to not give him those opportunities to play what Ike Taylor did and bump and run against, receivers, against bigger, longer guys, whether it's year one and then, for the rest of his career, looking obviously beyond year one, would be just the stupidest thing to do. And if that's what happens to Artie Burns, they don't use him, in some of those situations to play to his strengths, then shame on the coaching staff. But I don't expect that to happen. I think that you're going to see Artie Burns get some of those opportunities. How much, I can't put a great number on it. A lot of it's about his development. But once you see him get snaps out there, yeah, you're going to see him roll up and be able to press guys and try to pin him to the sideline. That's just utilizing a player's strengths and his skill set, and masking some of his weaknesses, whether it's, struggling to open up the gate and opening up too late in off coverage, whether it's off man or zone coverage. So you want to mask some of that early on and get him to be able to press and punch, use his length and open his hips and be able to turn and run with these receivers and that speed that he has. Matt Manzo says, regarding Hargrave and McCullers, do you see it as one or the other, or maybe a tag team situation? Yeah, I mean, I know I've spoken very highly of Hargrave and not so highly of Daniel McCullers. I guess I got to be careful not to get ahead of myself and say that Hargrave is going to run away with this thing, because, McCullers is a third-year guy. Hargrave is a rookie from a small school, South Carolina State. And McCullers did do a couple positive things last year. I thought he showed hustle. I thought against some of those, base blocks, he was able to hold the point of attack, but I just did not see the jump year one to year two that you would hope for from a guy like Daniel McCullers, and especially against some of those zone concepts where you have to flow down the line. It's going to be really tough for McCullers to stay on his feet, even with some of the tweaks to the cut blocking rule, or the chop blocking rule. I should say there's been so much confusion over that, but it's really not that confusing. And just trying to play down the line like that, and trying to not get reached by these smaller, quicker guards and centers. I think McCullers is really going to struggle there. It's not going to get any better. And Hargrave is a really good athlete that floats on the line well, that has good foot speed and balance and stays on his feet. I think that's a big reason why you're going to see Hargrave get snaps quicker than maybe what something for with McCullers. But to answer the question, Matt, I think there will be definitely some sort of timeshare of the snaps at the beginning. It won't be Hargrave week one, against Washington starting and playing 100% of the time in nose tackle. McCullers is going to get his time to again see where McCullers is at. But also knowing that it's tough for any rookie, especially someone in the trenches, to be able to play 100% of the time right away. We saw Hayward get eased into it. We saw Tua get eased into it. No, those guys had much better talent to jump. The point kind of stays the same. It's tough to have a defensive lineman just come in right away and expect to just wow everybody. He's going to have struggles too. He's going to get blown off the ball sometimes. He's going to miss the assignment. He's going to drop his head and lose the football. And McCullers is probably going to be a little bit ahead of that in that standpoint of knowing where everything's at and being used to the speed of the game, which, as we know, is the toughest thing for rookies to deal with. Jolly Rob 68. I think I had a question early. We'll answer this one really quick. Will Feeney and Davis be difference makers in Big Nickel? Again, if you're calling Big Nickel the 2-3-6 dime, then yes, I think Davis has a role. But I think that your nickel is going to be with Golson in the slot. So your 2-4-5 will be Gay and Cockrell, or maybe an Artie Burns on the outside, and Senquez Golson in the slot with Golden and Mike Mitchell at safety. So that's my nickel. It's not big nickel. It's your own regular nickel, because Senquez Golson has to get chance and his opportunities out there. So, but in dime, I think Davis can have an impact. Feeney, it's tough for me to see him vaulting all those outside linebackers. I think he's going to be a special teams guy. Year one, we'll worry about any other chance on defense, I think, starting in 2017, depending on how things go at outside linebacker, knowing that Jarvis Jones will be becoming a free agent, James Harrison will retire. Arthur Moats is Arthur Moats, and really your only long-term guy that you've seen a lot of tape on is Bud Dupree. So things can open up in 2017, but 2016, Feeney, special teams, make the team. Let's start with that before we start thinking about what he can do on defense. John Christinger, I think kind of already asked. He asked a couple of different questions. I'll try to find one that hasn't already been asked. Will Shamarko be a Steeler next year? So I guess that's assuming for 2017, not 2016. If it is, it'll be because special teams value. I think the ship has long sailed on Shamarko Thomas ever contributing anything on defense. For apparently the just having trouble being consistent above the neck was the phrase that's now infamously associated with Shamarko Thomas, said by Mike Tomlin. Just the mental struggles of the football or of the game, playing football. So if it is, it's just special teams, and he's now just a core guy that can be a gunner and a jammer. And run down kicks. So we'll see how he does this year. He's going to be a guy that's going to be fighting for a spot every year in the numbers crunch. When you're just a special teamer, you're always fighting a new competition. Always younger, fresher leg guys coming in. They can play special teams as well, and that's why special teams guys don't always hang around forever. Even the best ones, even Clint Creedwalt, Sean Morey, and my favorite Chidi Iwoma, they're not going to be around forever because you get younger, cheaper, fresher legs in who can do basically the same thing. So yeah, I don't know. My guess is that yes, Shamarko will be around, but if he is, it's just for special teams. Bob Francis says, and this is kind of a similar question: are you worried about Daniel McCullers being the default starter in base? What is the chance that Hargrave is ready? You don't really know how Hargrave will respond until he has to respond. So it's really hard for us to say. But from what John Mitchell has said and from what we kind of know about Hargrave, he's a hard worker. He's a high effort guy. I think he's got to get a little bit better running to the football once it crosses the line of scrimmage. But I think once you see Hayward and Tua and the crazy chase to the balls that they have, and even McCullers to an extent, those guys get after the football really, really hard. They don't take a play off. It's really remarkable. It's really fun to see. One of my favorite plays from last year, I think it was the Cardinals game. There's a vine on it I have from long ago. I think it was a pass to Larry Fitzgerald, and Fitzgerald's running 60 yards downfield and breaks some tackles, and then there you just see Stephon Tuitt, not even really close to the play, just taking off and running 50 yards downfield, trying to take an angle that could potentially end up having him meet Fitzgerald. Fitzgerald gets pushed out of bounds. Tuitt's never involved in the play. But it's plays like that we should just say, man, that's crazy. You guys that big should not move that well, and the heart and hustle that Stephon Tuitt has is really remarkable. So I think that's infectious. I think that'll rub off on Hargrave pretty quickly. But it's about, do you pick up the mental side of the ball? Do you take the teaching well enough? How do you handle double teams? How do you handle playing in this, 3 down, 2 down front? Something he didn't have to do at South Carolina State, which was a 4 down front. We'll see. It's really hard to answer that right now, but we know that the ability to be taught and the eagerness to learn is there for Hargrave. He's got a great teacher in John Mitchell, so I think he has the best opportunity to get playing time quickly. But again, we just don't know until it happens. No one knows until you get thrown out there. Let's look for the next one here. I'm gonna scroll down through. Zach says, "How much do you trust that our coaches will be able to develop Burns to be an above-average cornerback starter? To make your life easier, give me a percentage." I appreciate trying to make my life a little bit easier, Zach, but the percentage is, I think, just as tough for me because I don't have a great system. There's no criteria for me to have a percentage to it. I think the question is, how much do you trust Cardinal Lake? And although I think there's obviously an issue as an organization in finding, defensive backs and not having all the just complete whiffs, not even just misses, but whiffs that the Steelers have had in the late rounds, whether it's a Gerard Holloman or Terrence Frederick or Curtis Brown or Preston Butler, the list goes on and on and on. I don't think that's all on Carnell Lake. The question is really about, is it an evaluation issue or is it a development issue? And in Lake's defense, a lot of these guys have been cut right out of camp. Frederick, Holloman, guys that haven't hung around that much, Preston Butler, Joe Burnett. So Lake hasn't always had a ton of time to be able to work and develop these guys. As quickly as they come, they leave, and that's probably hard on Carnell Lake. But you could say that he deserves some blame as well. I don't have a great, is it 50-50 or what? That's impossible for me to say. But I recognize that there's a couple of different elements. Is it the scouting? Is it the decision makers making the wrong picks and just picking guys that don't have the talent to cut it? Or is it a lack of development from Carnell Lake? And that's, again, really, really hard for me to say. A lot of that's all of that is behind closed doors. So, have Lake getting that top round talent, though, is something that's relatively new in Pittsburgh, and it's going to be a real big test of Carnell Lake, because now we have a guy like Burns that's really talented, and a guy like Senquez Golson who's viewed as a top talent, and these guys shouldn't flame out as quickly as the others have. So now we're really going to know, what Carnell Lake can do with some high priced talent and how well he can kind of coach him and mold them up. The one thing I will say about Carnell Lake, and I don't think it gets talked about nearly enough, is I think he's a great teacher of technique, and staying clean and not having all these penalties in this era of the league cracking down on pass interference and the illegal hits to the helmet and things like that. If you look at it last year, if you count up all the defensive holdings and the pass interferences and things like that for Steelers defensive backs, they had 11 across the board for the, I think, 700 snaps of passes they faced last year. That's remarkable. I mean, I don't know what the league number is and how that compares to the league average, but I have to think it's one of the better numbers in the league. So I think it's something that has to be given credit for to Carnell Lake, that he's a great teacher of technique. We've seen guys like Mike Mitchell play a lot cleaner while still having their physicality very much at the forefront of their skill set. So, and you're seeing guys that can play clean and avoid those penalties that so many other teams have had, have been, subject to. One pass interference can cost you 50 yards. You don't have a lot of that in Pittsburgh. These guys are very, very clean. I think only Ross Cockrell had more than one pass interference last year. I think he had two. Everybody else was one or less. So I think that's a remarkable number. I think that speaks to development and coaching and teaching from Carnell Lake. So I think in that standpoint, there's some trust, there's some confidence. But again, we'll just kind of have to see what happens. Craig M., who's a longtime commenter, says, do you have much faith in a learning curve period for new draftees? Does maturity have very much of a bearing on player development? And then do I believe the experiment with Landry Jones is at an end? Craig, to the point about maturity, sure. I mean, that's got to be a role into it. Maturity is huge. And it's not always about junior or senior, but just how your makeup is, how your character is. There's a reason why you talk to these guys and get to know their family background and talk to them as a person. And so, it's kind of like the last question. It's about trust. Do I trust you to carry out the assignment? Do I trust you to listen to me, to respect me, to do what I say in drills and carry that over into games? So yeah, there's a high level of trust there. These guys are getting paid millions of dollars to do some of the toughest things that an athlete can do. These are jobs that are on the line: the player's job, the coach's job, the coordinator, position coach, the head coach. So you're putting a lot of trust in these guys, and if you're not mature enough to handle it mentally, we know how mental football is. Then you're not going to last in this league. Again, it's Shamarko Thomas, who's, I think, I would say, is a mature guy, but you're saying some of the mental issues of the game and not being able to be trusted on the field, that ends an NFL career that had promise. Then we've seen some real knuckleheads as well. Johnny Manziel is a very famous example of someone who just does not have the football maturity to act his age and to take advantage of the amazing opportunity that he had. So maturity is huge. There's no doubt about it. The Landry Jones experiment, I think Landry stays on the roster for one more year. There's really no other competition to push him. The Steelers seem very intent on keeping three quarterbacks. It does not seem to change anytime soon. So I think it'll be Ben, Gradkowski, and Landry Jones. Now, whether it's Jones the number two, is Gradkowski the number two, I think there'll be a competition in camp for that. It'll be very much open. I don't know who's going to be the winner there. But I think ultimately both will still stay on the roster. There's really nobody else. Dustin Vaughn has a futures contract who has shown the ability to stick onto a 53-man roster, but I don't think he's even ever thrown an NFL pass, and it's hard to think him being able to surpass Landry Jones. So I think it continues for at least one more year, Craig. Dorian James says, do you think Daylon Williams has a legitimate shot to beat out Landry Jones as a backup? I guess I should probably read these questions a little bit better in advance, just so I don't repeat them. I think Williams is a really interesting kid, though, and I thought he was probably the most interesting tryout player, at least on offense. But I think overall, of the 21 that are trying out for Pittsburgh right now, minicamp wrapping up right now, Williams was a guy that some people really, really liked. Emery Hunt, who does some great, profiles on small school players, had him as his number two quarterback as a second round grade. And yes, that's pretty out there and probably pretty crazy to some of you. But he had access to all 22 tape, and he gave a very reasonable, rational scouting report. I mean, I don't agree with it personally as a number two quarterback, but this guy's put in the work. He's not some guy just yapping his gums on the internet. I mean, he is, but you know what I mean. He's not just in caps lock. He's not Williams' father or something like that. He's put in the work, and he's worked really hard to evaluate these guys, and he's evaluated them all. So, I think the question though, when we talk about is he going to beat out Landry James or Landry Jones, though, the question is, can he make the 90-man roster? He's a tryout guy. To think about if he's going to make a 53-man roster and beat out Jones for a spot, that's some stuff that no one, even Williams himself, should not worry about right now. Get through minicamp, be one of the 1-2 guys that go from tryout to getting a contract, and then go into camp, make it through camp without getting cut, and play well. But that stuff that is so far out right now. You're just trying to get noticed, trying to get your first NFL contract, rather than trying to take a contract away from somebody else. What is this? The Fox 89. Hopefully, I'm pronouncing that correctly. Alex, would you say that this draft class has the possibility for every pick to contribute on the team in some way this year? If so, would you call this class a slam dunk? I think every class we start with, you have optimism. What is that saying? Hope springs eternal. We said that last year. I'm sure we say that every single year. So yeah, I think theoretically, almost like every other class, these guys can contribute. I think it's very difficult for a guy like Gerald Hawkins to contribute. I just obviously you're not getting the special teams value, and there's no real path to playing time along the offensive line unless at least 2 injuries happen to tackle, which knock on wood, hopefully that does not happen. But yeah, I mean, you could make a case where every single guy, I think, outside of Hawkins can be, year one contributors, whether it's on offense or defense or special teams. But is that going to ultimately happen? It's very unlikely. When you have a stable, solid roster like Pittsburgh, it's tough for all 7 rookies to make it. You're not a Cleveland where you're gutted and you're just trying to get talent onto the roster. You're going to go into camp probably with 48 spots locked up. So they do the math, that leaves you 5 spots, for everybody else to try to get on, those couple late round guys, and whoever else kind of ends up, showing themselves to be in the competition, like a Rosie Nix last year. There's always somebody that shows up. So the point is that there were not a lot of roster spots to go around. And just from the math alone, it's tough for everybody to get on the roster right away and then get a helmet on game day to be part of the active 45. So theoretically, sure, but in practice, probably not. Steeler Tony says, are there any potential cuts or current free agents that could help out? Talking about some veteran guys here. I know Colbert had made a pass. You're going to look at this after the draft. Veterans get cut as we've seen with Mike Adams, and we've seen league wide. It's tough to pinpoint a name, though. The talent is poor out here. There's a reason why guys are still unsigned, why guys are getting cut right now. It's not a good sign. It's not you're picking up some guys that are long shots. I know Colbert had kind of said they could look at corner, but I don't think there were any big name corners released, and the ones that were like a Chris Culliver was a failed physical who's got severe knee injuries, and it'd be surprising to see him get picked up. I think the only name that I saw of guys that were released that could have a logical connection to Pittsburgh and not just, hey, I like this guy, let's go sign him, because we can say that about everybody. But I thought the one guy that made some sense as having a Pittsburgh background was Sean Hickey, who's the tackle who was released by the Jets. He was, I think, a draft pick last year out of Syracuse, who the Steelers had interest in the pre-draft process. Munchak had, I don't know if he went to his pro day, but there was some connection with Mike Munchak talking to him. Hickey's a Pittsburgh native. He went to Murraysville, which, if you don't know, is pretty close to Pittsburgh. He worked out with Tunch Ilkin during the pre-draft process last year. So there's a strong Pittsburgh connection there, both kind of, indirectly and directly as well. So yeah, that's a guy that wouldn't shock me if he gets claimed or picked up at some point. That's a guy that definitely has no guarantees to make this roster, and he's not a veteran. He's going into his second year in the NFL. But I think if there's one guy on the free agent wire that I could see get picked up that makes sense from, I could see Pittsburgh doing it and not just I like him. I think it's Sean Hickey as another tackle guy into the fray. Especially if there's a late injury that happens, someone goes on PUP. That's what happened with Mike Adams last year right before camp. He gets put on PUP. They signed Kelvin Palmer. You have to go into camp with 15 linemen. You can basically have 3 teams, 5, of course. So right now the team is at 15 offensive linemen. I believe, although I'm trying to think now, I'm trying to think out loud. With the Mike Adams release, I think they actually might be at 14 now. I'm gonna have to double check that because I'm trying to think. I did my roster outlook before the Mike Adams cut, so I think they're actually at 14 right now. But I'm gonna have to get back to you guys on that, and because usually this team wants to go in with 15. And then if someone gets hurt, either you sign somebody or then you start playing a guy, second team left tackle, third team right tackle, or whatever the case is. But so I could see an offensive lineman being brought in. I thought Sean Hickey makes some sense. Schoolhouse Rock says, could you see a scenario where Burns and Cockrell start on the outside and we move Gay to the slot? The only way I could see that is if Senquez Golson really falls on his face. I think Golson's going to be the expected, anticipated starter in nickel this year. I think that was going to be his path last year, at least being the backup. And then when he got hurt, that's what forced the Brandon Boykin deal because there was no backup corner in the slot to William Gay. You had Antoine Blake, you had Ross Cockrell, you had Cortez Allen. None of those guys can play in the slot, so they needed somebody else to be the backup to Gay in case something happened to William Gay. But I think the goal is for Wilson to be in the slot and to show himself to play at the level that the second round pick was supposed to be. So unless Golson, an injury happens or his play is really, really poor, I don't think you're going to be able to have Gay in the slot. I think Gay will be on the outside with Golson in the slot, and then likely Cockrell as your week 1 starter at usually the left cornerback spot, and then maybe if Burns is able to work in some rotation or something like that. Nick Sabatella has a couple here. Let me try to pick out one of the questions. He says, why is Timmons the inside linebacker that drops into deep zone coverage and not Shazier? Seems like Timmons had a down year last year. From what I saw, he's doing things in space that I imagine Shazier would have done based off his measurables. That's a really good question, Nick. That's a question I would love to be able to ask somebody just to learn more about football and learn more about their approach. We did see Timmons get taken off the field, though, again, week 14 and on, in some of those dime packages where Robert Golden became that role instead of Lawrence Timmons, which I think was post-Oakland game where, Timmons couldn't carry. I think it was Crabtree down the middle, and it was a long touchdown. I think, again, it goes back to trust, though, and knowing that how to carry out your assignment, playing with better technique, having the reps in practice to do so, which Shazier, because of the injuries, has really not been able to get those reps in practice. So I think it's about a trust factor. And Timmons is not the better athlete than Shazier, but Timmons is still a strong athlete, no doubt about it. So I think it's a trust, knowing where to be, to get in the right place, to play with the proper technique once you get in the place. And the reps that you take in practice all kind of gave him the edge over Shazier. Though you would expect eventually Shazier to get more of that assignment and play in that role more than Timmons, because you're right, the measurables would say he's better suited to do so. But again, if the Steelers go to more dime, then they wouldn't have to do that because whoever your dime guy is, Sean Davis or Golden, or whoever, is going to probably kind of play more of that assignment. It's a good question, though. I would love to have a concrete answer myself. A couple more here. Shannon Stevenson says, "Happy Mother's Day, Alex. Happy Mother's Day, Shannon. Who's your favorite player? Not who you think will do the best, but the guy that you personally like as an individual." Well, I think if you guys know me, in terms of all-time Steelers, my favorite is Chidi Awoma, the special teams gunner, back in the mid 2000s, for just kind of the fearlessness and playing that special teams phase, and a guy that gets no respect, the Ronnie Dangerfield. But yeah, so Chidi's my favorite player of all time. Have a jersey from him, have it signed, got it signed at training camp years and years ago, and then we were down at the Senior Bowl, and we had gone there for the weigh-ins. It was the first event of the Senior Bowl on, I believe it was that Tuesday, and so we got there super early for the weigh-ins because we wanted to make sure we got a seat, and we just sat down. And then just by chance, just total random blind luck, the entire Steelers scouting staff sits in the row in front of us. So it's Mark Bruner and Brandon Hunt. It was there, and then sitting one seat over to the right of me, and then of course the row down was Chidi Iwoma, which was super cool moment. He's I believe he's a Blesto scout for Pittsburgh. So he's doing some of the national scouting and sending out national reports and getting some national reports and things like that. But I didn't talk to him because there was nothing intelligent that was going to come out of my mouth that I could form into a question for someone that probably does not get asked, hey, you're Chidi Iwoma, that very often. They would have been just stupid words coming out of my mouth, and I was trying to be a professional and represent the site well. But it was just cool to see. I saw him later in the lobby, but again, just there was nothing smart that was going to come out of my mouth. But he's my favorite player of all time. Right now on the roster, it's hard not to love Roosevelt Nix for the same reasons that I'm sure the rest of you love Roosevelt Nix. I love Danny Smith. He's not a player, but it's hard not to love. I'm a big special teams guy. I love the third phase, the guys that do the dirty work and get very little credit for it, the guys that help separate a win and a loss. And special teams is how you start every single game. So I think people don't always look at it the way that it should be and the value that it has. Other players all time, yeah, of course, how can you not love Joe Green? That's a very easy answer to give, but his story, the way that he played, his upbringing, and just the greatest Steeler in franchise history. And there's a lot of great Steelers, but I think Joe Green for me is the unquestioned, number one player in franchise history. Then the other one I would give you, because I love the pre-Noel guys. I'm weird about that. I love the special teams, and I love the pre-Noel era because no one talks about the pre-Noel era. They think the Steelers franchise began basically with the Immaculate Reception in 1972, or with the start of Chuck Noll in 1969. But I like to think about the guys before that, from 1933 till before Chuck Noll got here. And there's so many cool stories and names and things like that. I mean, I've done some articles on it in the past, some regularly stuff, recap the 1933 and 1934 Pittsburgh Pirates. They were called the Pirates until 1940. So you have so many cool stories there. But one of my favorite, who's a little bit later than that, is Big Daddy Lipscomb, who was a defensive tackle, played next to Ernie Stautner, was traded from the Baltimore Colts, I believe, in the late 50s. I think he played from like 1960 to 1962 or somewhere in that range. Who was just one of the first big men who could really move. I mean, this guy was, I think, 6'5", 300 pounds. And he was a really great athlete. So just his size was unique. His athleticism was unique. He never played college football. He was playing, I think, in the Navy or something. I forget the whole story behind it. And he got picked up by the Rams and was part of that great Rams defensive line. Um, and then he was with the Baltimore Colts for a while as well, and part of that. Then he was in Pittsburgh for a couple of years. Sadly, though, he died of a supposed heroin overdose. Still a lot of controversy over what happened that night. They said that he hated needles, and that he would have never injected himself with heroin through a needle. I mean, the whole story is kind of, it gets kind of sad and tragic and confusing from there. But I think that story is very cool, but also very tragic, and I don't think many people know about it. There's a great article by Sports Illustrated. There was one of their vault pieces, an article on him. And my hope and my goal is to write about Lipscomb and his story during the offseason as we get into the kind of the dead months of June and early July, and maybe try to interview some people that played with him. I kicked around some couple ideas last night, and maybe some people I could interview. So if you, by any random chance, know somebody that knows who Big Daddy Lipscomb is, or was played with him, or teammates, or friends, or whatever the case is, please let me know. I would love, 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 love to have that opportunity to talk to somebody, to have some fresh and original quotes behind it. Uh, Mint Dragon, it's probably one of our next to last questions. Says we always look for a jump for second year players. Anxious to see which ones will be stepping up in camp and becoming part of the core group of the 2016 Steelers. Which ones are you expecting to grow the most or most significantly? I think there's some pretty obvious answers there. Sammy Coates, the opportunity that he's going to get, and he's not going to be handed anything. He's still got to beat out Darius Hayward Bay, and that's a veteran who works hard, who's detail oriented, the best blocker on this team. But we know the coach is the younger guy with his superior athleticism, and the size. I mean, Hayward Bay's still a great athlete, but we know the coach can really fly, and he's got fresher, younger legs than Darius Hayward Bay. So you want to see him step up. I want to see Jesse James continue what he carried over the last half of last year. I think James will become the number 2 tight end, and Matt Spaeth will really become a reserve role, which is probably best for him and the Steelers involved, because now James is going to give you more of a passing option than what Matt Spaeth could ever do. So I want to see James become more of an accomplished blocker, but I think he can. I thought what he did in limited work last year overall was impressive. The moment didn't look too big for him. Coming in, I think his first game was against Oakland, and he's blocking defensive ends by himself the way that Heath or Spaeth would be asked to do, and he did it, I thought, reasonably well. So I think that's impressive. He was technically, as we say, a senior last year. He was drafted as a junior. So this past year was his senior year. So I think physically, mentally, he's probably ready to make the jump. Then of course, Bud Dupree. Hopefully takes what he learned from year one and becomes a more consistent pass rusher, a little bit better moves, maybe a little bit better bend around the edge. And then Ross Cochran, who I mentioned earlier, being able to take that step as one of the non-rookies to have a year to go through the learning period, to go through OTAs and go through a full training camp and really get to soak up the defense and understand things instead of just getting thrown onto the field and being able to play 65% of the time when you just got to this organization. I think that's a really big benefit for Ross Cockrell. So I want to see him, continue to make progress. There's a couple new ones I think came in as I was answering these. So let me just do 2 more. And if I did miss your question by any chance, and I don't think I did, please ask it again Thursday in our Ask Alex, which we'll do the live chat for. Texas Steelers says, do you know the last time the Steelers have kept all their draft choices on the 53-man roster for game 1 of the regular season? If you don't know, when was the last time to have them all on either the 53-man roster or practice squad? I'm literally looking at that for the first time, and honestly, I could not tell you with any sort of confidence when the last time that was. Obviously, it was not last year with Durant Grant, Anthony Chickolo, and Gerard Holloman, of course, getting cut from the start, and Holloman not making the practice squad. If I sat down for 5 minutes and just kind of thought about it and looked it up, I could probably tell you. So I will actually respond to that one in the comments right now. By the time you see this will go up Monday. I'm recording this on Sunday. So you will get that answer here in a minute, and you'll know the answer, I guess, by the time that you see my answer. I did not say that very eloquently. So I think I'll wrap this up with a final question from Trey Brooks, who kind of asked a similar question to what we said earlier. Is this the end of the road for Shamarko Thomas? Do you think Will Gay could switch to safety towards the end of his career like some corners have? Like I said, for Shamarko, it's the end for him playing defense. For any thought to that, however he makes his roster from here on out, it's going to be for special teams ability. I don't see it on defense. I think Sean Davis was the final kind of nail in that coffin. For William Gay, I think at this point, Gay's got another 2 years left, probably in his NFL career, and I don't think he's going to make the move to safety. There's not a compelling reason to do so. There's no big hole at safety with Golden there and Sean Davis now being drafted. So I think Gay's still playing at a high level at corner. He's still got a little bit of speed. I mean, I said this before. He's ran step for step with Travis Benjamin on a 9 route last year. So while Gay's not a super athlete by any means, he's always able to play with good technique and know when to open the gate and stay in phase. So I think he stays a corner for however long he plays in the NFL. All right, guys. I think that's all the questions. I think we got through 25 or something like that questions. Really, really appreciate the quick questions and support out there, all the kind words. I do appreciate it. If you have any ideas for any other video series that you would like to see that I could do with what I have to work with, again, I have no editing software or cameras. As you can clearly, this is a Google Hangout / YouTube. way of doing this just to supplement the terrible podcast. If you have anything you'd like to see that could be easily done with me just talking, I'm all for it. We'll try to do some more of these mailbag things again in our addition to our Ask Alex, regular Thursday edition, which takes place at 2:30 p.m. Eastern time. But again, appreciate it. Please, whatever constructive criticism, please leave. It's always welcomed. You gotta have thick skin. Trust me, I don't take any of it personally. Thank you again for watching, and we will talk to you for our mailbag as usual on Thursday.